Imagine you are a Japanese samurai. It is the year 1593. You have crossed the sea with 30,000 of the finest warriors in Asia. You have faced enemy armies before. You have bled for your warlord. You are not afraid to die. But nothing has prepared you for this. A wooden cart crests the hill above you. 2 wheels. A board full of holes. It looks almost laughable. A wooden cart against 30,000 samurai. Then someone lights a fuse, and the sky tears open. 200 rocket-propelled fire arrows erupt into the air in a single breath. Not 1, 200. In less than a second, the sky above your position is nothing but smoke, fire, and screaming iron. There is nowhere to run. There is no formation for this. No armor stops it, no shield wall deflects it. Men who were standing are simply gone. This is the Hwacha, the world's first multiple rocket launcher, built not in the 20th century, not in World War II, but in medieval Korea. And it didn't just win battles, it saved an entire civilization. This is a story of the most terrifying weapon of the medieval world, and the 3,000 men who used it to hold back an army 10 times their size. To understand the Hwacha, you have to understand the problem it was built to solve. Korea in the 1300s sat at the intersection of 3 of history's most dangerous empires. To the north, the Mongols, and later the Jurchen tribes. To the west, vast and often aggressive Chinese dynasties. And across a narrow strip of sea, Japan, which was never truly at peace. Korean engineers and military strategists were not playing games. They were building weapons under existential pressure. Get it wrong, your kingdom ceases to exist. Get it right, your people survive. So they got it right. Around 1409 AD, during the reign of King Taejong of the Joseon dynasty, Korean weapons engineers began developing the Singajeon, which roughly translates as magical machine arrow. That name is not arrogance, it was earned. The Singajeon was unlike any arrow in the world at that time. A standard war arrow, but attached to its shaft was a bamboo or paper cylinder packed with gunpowder. When ignited, that cylinder acted as a rocket motor, dramatically extending the arrow's range and giving it explosive force on impact. One arrow propelled by fire. Already terrifying, Korean engineers didn't stop at one. They built a cart. A 2-wheeled wooden cart, mobile, low to the ground, and deceptively simple. Mounted on top was a flat board, drilled with rows upon rows of holes. Each hole is designed to hold a single Singajeon, a single rocket arrow. The early models held 100 rockets. A crew of 2 men could load, aim, and fire. All 100 arrows connected to a single fuse. Light it, and every single one fires simultaneously. 100 arrows, moving at rocket speed, raining down in a single heartbeat. Later, engineers pushed it further. By the late 1500s, the Hwacha fire chariot had been upgraded to fire 200 arrows per volley, and it could be reloaded and fired again. To put that in perspective, the M270 multiple launch rocket system used by NATO today fires 12 rockets per salvo. Medieval Korea was firing 200 in the 15th century. Let that land. By the time the Hwacha had been in service for nearly 200 years, it was about to face its greatest test. In 1592, one of the most powerful warlords in Japanese history decided he wanted more than Japan. Toyotomi Hideyoshi. The man had already unified Japan after a century of brutal civil war. His army had been forged in decades of unrelenting internal conflict. These were not ceremonial soldiers. These were professionals, hardened, disciplined, and equipped with firearms adapted from European technology. And Hideyoshi's ambition didn't stop at the sea. His plan was staggering in its scope. Conquer Korea, use it as a land bridge, then conquer China, then push west, all the way to India. It was a plan so bold it bordered on insanity, but he had the army to attempt it. On May 23, 1592, a Japanese fleet of over 700 ships carrying approximately 158,000 soldiers landed at Busan on Korea's southern coast. The initial Korean resistance crumbled. Japanese forces moved north with terrifying speed. Within weeks, the capital had fallen. The Korean king had fled. Japan seemed unstoppable. But Korea refused to break. At sea, Admiral Yi Sun-sin, one of the greatest naval commanders in all of human history, was systematically destroying Japanese supply lines with his famous turtle ships. And on land, Korean commanders were learning, adapting, and deploying every weapon at their disposal, including the Hwacha, and they were about to need every single one. February 12, 1593. The fortress of Hangzhou sits on a hill above the Han River. It is not a massive fortress. It is not stocked for a long siege. Inside its walls stand 3,000 Korean soldiers, monks, civilians, and conscripted men, commanded by General Guan Yul. Outside those walls, 30,000 Japanese warriors, 10 to 1, 10 men for every single defender. In any rational military calculation, this fortress falls within hours. The Japanese commanders knew it. Their soldiers knew it. What they did not know was what was waiting for them on those walls. General Guan Yul had positioned his Wachas carefully, multiple units placed along the walls, each aimed at the narrow approach routes the Japanese would have to use. The hillside itself was a trap. The defenders had turned the geography into a killing corridor. The Japanese launched their assault with the certainty of overwhelming force. Wave after wave of samurai surged toward the walls, screaming war cries, armor gleaming, banners flying. They had crossed an ocean. They had conquered a capital. They had nothing to fear from a hilltop fortress. Then the fuses were lit. The Hwachas erupted. 200 fire arrows per volley, screaming downward into tightly packed Japanese formations. The rocket-assisted arrows punched through armor, and the Japanese were massed together on narrow paths, nowhere to spread out. The geometry of the hillside had turned the defenders' numerical weakness into a massacre. Wave after wave of attackers crashed against the walls. Wave after wave was cut down by the relentless fire from above. The Japanese launched 9 separate assaults that day. 9 waves. Each one batted back. The Wetcher crews loaded and fired, smoke pouring from their positions, the ground below the walls stacking with dead. Korean defenders who ran out of arrows reportedly began ripping tiles off the fortress roof and hurling them down at the attackers. Civilian women carried ammunition to the men on the walls. These were not people doing the math on 10 to 1 odds. These were people who had decided to hold. And they held. Japanese casualties at Hangzhou were catastrophic. Estimates vary across historical accounts, but the losses numbered in the thousands, with some records suggesting over 10,000 Japanese soldiers fell in that single day. The 3,000 had held. The Battle of Hangzhou sent shockwaves through both armies. For Korea, it was the first major land victory of the war, proof that Japan was not invincible. For Japan, it shattered the momentum and confidence that had carried them north since the first landings. It was the beginning of the end of Hideyoshi's dream. The Hwachcha didn't win the war by itself, but at Hangzhou, it saved the kingdom. Here is what strikes me most about the Hwachcha. It wasn't built by a military superpower. It wasn't developed inside a vast empire with unlimited resources. It was built by a kingdom under constant threat, a people who knew that if they stopped innovating, they would be erased, and they produced something so far ahead of its time that we're still talking about it 600 years later. The Hwachcha predates the modern multiple launch rocket system by half a millennium. When European armies were still working out how to use black powder in basic cannons, Korea had already developed a precision multi-rocket delivery platform, mobile, crewed by 2 men, and capable of saturating a target zone with 200 projectiles in under a second. That is not medieval thinking. That is a doctrine that armies around the world wouldn't fully adopt until the 20th century. The Imjin War ended in 1598, following Hideyoshi's death. Japan withdrew from the peninsula, their grand vision of continental conquest in ruins. Korea had survived, battered, scarred, but unbroken. History rightly remembers Admiral Yi Sun-sin as one of Korea's greatest heroes. But the Hwachcha, and the engineers who built it, and the soldiers who fired it from fortress walls against impossible odds, deserved to stand in that same light. There are weapons that win battles, and there are weapons that change the nature of warfare itself. The Hwachcha was both. The Hwachcha was a reminder that military history is not just a record of battles. It is a record of the human will to survive, and the extraordinary lengths men will go to protect what they love. From a Korean workshop in the 15th century, engineers built something that should not have existed for another 500 years, and Korean soldiers used it to stand in a fortress against forces that should have crushed them utterly. They stood anyway. That is what this channel is about. Not just the weapons, not just the tactics, but the men behind them, the engineers who dared to imagine something new, the commanders who found a way when there wasn't one, and the soldiers who held the line when everything said it couldn't be held. There are hundreds of these stories, weapons that changed the world, battles that should have been lost and weren't. Technologies so far ahead of their time they almost read like fiction. We are just getting started. If you want to go deeper into history's most extraordinary weapons and the warriors who carried them, subscribe. hit that notification bell because the next weapon we're covering is just as brutal, just as ingenious, and just as forgotten by mainstream history. But before you go, I want to hear from you, because the men who fired the howitzer that day at Hangzhou had everything against them. 10-to-1 odds, no reinforcements coming, no guarantee any of them walked off that hill. So tell me in the comments, what would you have done? Do you hold the fortress, or do you fall back and live to fight another day? And here's one more. Which weapon do you think history has buried that deserves its own episode? Drop it below. The best suggestions might just become the next video. 3,000 men held against 30,000. The howitzer made it possible. Stay sharp. We'll see you in the next one. Every weapon has a story, and every story changed the battlefield. If you enjoy uncovering the machines and inventions that shaped history, subscribe to the Ordnance Files, and join us next time when we'll open another file from the arsenal of history.